but one is enough. I'm not quite sure what's going on. My phone, I was here on time. My phone wasn't. It was just like not bringing up the YouTube thing. But anyway, here we are. How are you doing? What time is it there? Is it around about midnight or 10, 11? What time is it there? Anyway, behind me, the scene behind me is a photo I took. I think it was the first evening in Auvers-sur-Oise. I actually thought I was heading to the cemetery, and although I think there was a cemetery, there wasn't the cemetery, and it was still quite a magical experience. You can see how it's early spring. And it was May 2019, and the tree was just like full of the trees. The landscape was just full of this golden light. It was quite a special first night in Auvers-sur-Oise. Hi, Amy. Hi, Sharon. Sharon, also good to have you here. Sunflowers, good to see you here as well. Very appropriate avatar for the subject matter. Macho Man. Wow, we've got a macho man here. Okay, interesting comment. That's, I guess, what you get when you have subscribers allowed onto this. Lynn Coleman, good to have you. Timmy, come. Madeline Jimenez, good to see you. So we're going to be talking about portraits. I think it's chapter 11 in this book, right? And we're going to touch on something that I don't really think has ever been put together. Like, I could be wrong. You guys can set me straight if you think I'm wrong, but we're going to talk about loneliness on the one hand, and Van Gogh painting portraits, but portraits in this episode really deals with the last events of June 1890. From the next episode, from 8 onwards, we're going into the very last month of Van Gogh's life. And we've kind of been trying to make the case that in June he was a happy camper. He wasn't he wasn't depressed, he wasn't sitting at home moping, he wasn't expressing any problems in his letters, and everyone around him seemed to think he was happy as well. So that's the case we've been making in June. July is definitely going to be different. It's a bit more complicated, but we've got to take what we know from June also into July. Stephanie says hello. Ugh. He's kicking my keyboard. Ugh. If he keeps doing that, he's going to knock over glasses of water, everything. Anyway, so let's just see who else is here. Timmy's yawning. Okay, so we've actually got 25 people in chat. That's not too bad for such short notice. Do you guys want to hear a story before I get going with this episode? Hello, Timmy. Do you think we can get Timmy to howl? He's actually got some burrs and thorns in this long hair of his paws, so it kind of needs that to be. That's what you get for leaving some hair long. Edie Gell, hi from Wisconsin. Danielle Lee, Censored Nana, good to see you. Janet Babb. Okay, so Timmy, I think I'm going to put you down. Hope you don't mind. It's just a bit dangerous. If he knocks things over, it could be a little bit of a problem. Let me move my glasses. So just a short little story. I went for a mountain bike ride It's the equivalent of your today, earlier today, but for me, it's because it's 4 o'clock in the morning here. It was yesterday lunchtime. I don't normally go out in the heat of the day, but this time I did. It was also a little bit different. There were storm clouds building up. We have eventually had very big storms, downpours and so on, following all of those clouds building up. But anyway, so I went out and same place where, do you guys remember me talking about the ostrich crossing? Do you guys remember that? Where I said there were like 5 ostriches that were doing something. They were like about to cross the road. So it's sort of the similar area, a little bit more kind of a Horseshoe Bend area, a bit further away, but same sort of area. And I was coming down quite a long road and I saw this thing. And it was an ostrich taking a dust bath. It was a male ostrich. You've got to be more careful around them than the females. And so there's this, it kind of looked like a very ugly bride in a black wedding dress instead of a white wedding dress, who's sitting on the ground with this very ugly long neck. But what was happening was this male ostrich was taking a dust bath. And I think partly because it was very hot, I think partly because I guess it's their way of getting rid of lice or something like that, but a pretty weird thing. And I actually thought if I come by, I slowed down. I thought if I come by on my bike, it's going to jump up, maybe even try and chase me because it's a male on the road. I actually I caught him with his pants down, but he kind of actually just stayed on the ground, believe it or not. I went to the opposite side of the road and, passed slowly and his head just turned. And then off I went and I kind of still looked over my shoulder. I was like, what is actually going on there? Is it a dust bath? And then I saw him kind of flapping and sort of, how can I put it, just, being in the dust. So it was, I was thinking, is that like the oddest thing I've ever seen in my life? It's maybe in the top 500, but it definitely was pretty strange. And then I actually thought, I'm definitely going to tell you guys that story. I was like riding, which is now coming to the end of my ride. I was thinking, I'm going to definitely tell you guys the story. And then as I was sort of exiting this area, it's like a reserve, there was a giraffe. I think it's just I didn't get a very good long look at it because it was on the side, but there was a giraffe sitting down. You don't often see that. I have seen it on my dad's farm where the baby's sort of sitting almost in the shade of its parent. It just looked like this giraffe was kind of sitting down. You kind of got the idea that it was just hot for these animals, and they were like, also with the clouds building, it was like almost like hoping it's going to rain to break the heat. And then I thought, wow, that's pretty interesting. And then at the bottom of this area, just before I exited, there were maybe 6. I'm not sure if they're called fallow deer, but they are like, they kind of look like Bambis. They've sort of got antlers and they've got those little dots on them. Not quite sure if they fallow deer or reindeer or whatever. But suddenly in the space of 3 minutes, 5 minutes, I saw a bunch of sort of different animals, and all of them were in one way or another. Well, all of them were actually sitting on the ground or doing something on the ground. Those fallow deer, I think 3 or 4 of them were under a tree sitting. As I said, it was the heat of the day, so it was quite an interesting little, almost like a Garden of Eden experience, just like suddenly all of these animals. And I wonder whether they sort of know it's going to rain, and they're sort of sitting like, we're waiting for it to rain, guys. Let's just hold on. Yeah, they were people watching. Funnily enough, talking about people watching, funnily enough, yeah, I think I'll probably just not include that. Okay, so Bridget Bowman, good to have you here. Terry Dean. So this is subscribers are also allowed to chat, obviously members as well. From the weekend onwards, we're going to be back to members only. So subscribers, enjoy yourselves. This weekend, we're going to be doing, so Saturday, we'll probably be doing Barry Morphew. Is it episode 6? And by the way, we're going to change things slightly. I want to keep going through those interviews that he gave. So we're going to jump forward about 30 odd pages. And then we're going to go through the other 7 interviews he gave, just because I think it's important to go through them all back to back, even though there's a bit of a time jump between them, right? And then Sunday, hopefully we can do another StreamYard with Stephanie. This is on a really interesting chapter dealing with Van Gogh visiting his family, and things don't go well. And you kind of got to ask yourself, did this trigger him? How much did it trigger him? How much did it really distress him? Because everyone was actually distressed. He was distressed. His brother was distressed. His brother's wife was distressed. It's something they wrote about. And the question is, how significant was this? And that deals with events in July. And then obviously he died at the end of that month. Stephanie says, I think that's a great idea while the first, are in our mind. Yeah, absolutely. So that's what we're going to do. Those lives will be back to members only. So members only, you can pat yourselves on the back. Those who aren't and who are tempted to be, maybe you should try joining. Karen, to me is beautiful. You are beautiful. Okay, I really want to put him down because I kind of need to pick this book up, but maybe I can let him go. Except he just wants me to hold him. Okay. So the subject matter we're dealing with here is specifically dealing with Vincent van Gogh being lonely, something we touched on in the previous episode, but also that he's painting portraits, that he's in Orvez painting a bunch of portraits. He's painted Dr. Gachet, he's painted his daughter, he's painted Adeline, and he's also painted this little girl holding an orange that they say could be the neighbor's daughter, or it could be the daughter of the innkeeper as well. So he's not lonely in the sense that he doesn't see anybody. Real loneliness is when he was in the asylum, and we're going to deal with that in a moment. Timmy, can I put you down? Okay, we need to get going. Stephanie says this is a great chapter. It really is. It's got quite a lot packed into it, so I think we should get going. We had around about 15 minutes. Hi to Christina Charlotte. Have I missed anyone? Censored Nana says they totally know when it's going to rain. Does seem that way. Swanny Bugs also seem to know. Okay, so let me show you in this book. We are on this page, and oh dear. So we're on page 83, and the chapter's titled Portraits. And the quote under the chapter is obviously from one of Van Gogh's letters. He writes, "What I'm most passionate about, much, much more than all the rest in my profession, is the portrait, the modern portrait." And then the author actually has Marguerite Gachet as the sort of kind of title image for this chapter, which I think is totally appropriate. I can't think of a better image to introduce what he's trying to say. So there, I totally support the picture that is used. So in the previous episode, we dealt with Van Gogh writing about and admitting to feelings of extreme loneliness, quote unquote, extreme loneliness. In fact, the full quote written near the end of June reads as follows. This is what he wrote, I think, to his brother. He wrote, "I began to paint again, even though I could barely hold the brush, but knowing exactly what I wanted to paint, I began 3 more large canvases of large wheat fields under cloudy skies, and it did not take a great deal to express sadness and loneliness. I believe these paintings say what words cannot." And he was talking about that painting that we previously had up behind me, right? I actually have that picture on my bedroom wall. And so he was talking about, now the interesting thing is, in this particular quote, he says, it did not take a great deal to express sadness and loneliness. Now, other quotes say him saying extreme loneliness. So as an author, what you really want to do, I'm afraid I'm not going to do it now, but what you really want to do is go to the original text, the original letter that he wrote. Not sure if it was in French or in Dutch. I think it was French. I think he wrote his brother in French. But anyway, he wrote some letters in French, some in Dutch. I could be wrong, but anyway, the point is to go and look at the original letter and to see, did he write just loneliness or did he write extreme loneliness? So I'll give you an Afrikaans example. Afrikaans is a derivative of Dutch. If someone is Dutch, they'll probably raise their eyes and say, not, it's very different or something. But if you're writing in Afrikaans, you might say, being lonely is alleen. The word lonely in Afrikaans is alleen. And so if you were saying, I'm feeling really alone, I'm feeling extremely alone, you'd say, verskriklik alleen. Verskriklik kind of means extremely or terrifyingly or, something like that. So if that word's missing, then you would just say, well, he's feeling alone. But if he's saying, ek voel verskriklik alleen, then you would imagine, okay, that is very, very alone. And so that's something you want to kind of go and establish. I'm kind of making the case in this chapter that he was alone, I don't want to say his whole life, but certainly in the last 2 years of his life, he was particularly alone. And that in the last 2 months of his life, he was actually less alone than, for example, he'd been at the asylum. Does that make sense? But in terms of this, him being quoted as saying extremely lonely and lonely, you really want to go to the original text to verify which one is it. Do you guys know which picture I'm talking about when I talk about that landscape? Or do I need to turn my phone around? Maybe I should show you guys. So it's really dealing with this landscape, and you can't really appreciate it when it's that small, but it's basically, especially where the blue is very intense and kind of fairly dark, and there's kind of no clouds there, that boundary between the blue and the far, far away fields, that's the part that I think he's talking about loneliness. If you look slightly in the foreground, there's actually a figure in the foreground working alone in this vast expanse. That's, I think, kind of bringing this idea of loneliness and sadness. Bear in mind him painting this, bear in mind him being in this setting means that in a way he is that figure, meaning, he is surrounded by this very large kind of landscape, and he's alone. He's alone in it, right? It's always such a mission setting this up properly once I turn it back. PA Farm Girl says she understands. Wheat field under the thunderclouds. Okay, so if you're a proponent of the suicide theory, now is the time to start sort of rubbing your hands. You might say, oh, so he was lonely. Well, that's it then. Okay, but hold on. It's true that Van Gogh did experience feelings of extreme loneliness in Auvers-sur-Oise, but he'd had those feelings for a long time. That's the other thing also to mention in terms of the money. You know, you might say he didn't have any money, he was struggling. Well, he didn't have money for many, many years. He was a struggling artist his whole life. So if you're a struggling artist your whole life, you're used to being a struggling artist. So just a few weeks prior in Saint-Remy, he was really lonely, and that's why he left. So he was like, I'm really lonely here. I think I'm going to leave. And then he did. And where he went was a less lonely place. It seems obvious, but it is obvious. Nevertheless, people seem to have this idea he went from Saint-Remy to Auvers-sur-Oise and just got lonelier and lonelier and then took his life. That's not really what happened. He had a really good month in June. There was a little bit of unhappiness in July, but the question is, how significant was that? That's what we need to assess. But he was also lonely months before that in Arles. And one of the major reasons that he wanted Paul Gauguin to come and stay with him was so that he'd have a friend with him. And he kind of did get more and more kind of desperate. It's one thing to be by yourself. It's another where you're waiting for someone, they just don't pitch up. And, he painted the walls yellow, and he painted all sorts of yellow paintings to sort of decorate, not yellow paintings, pictures of sunflowers, which are yellow, to decorate the house in anticipation of his pal coming along. And then he actually, I think Gauguin actually took some of those paintings without permission. I'm not quite sure what it is, but Gauguin left with some of Van Gogh's paintings. I think some of them were those sunflower paintings. Anyway, Gauguin taking such a long time to arrive tormented Van Gogh because he was lonely. Now you have a weird analogy to that now, where Van Gogh's family, his brother, his sister-in-law, they're about to take a break from, well, in Theo's case, a break from work, but just kind of go on a holiday. Bear in mind it's summer, and they want to decide between going to visit family in Holland with a little baby, to show the baby to Theo's mother, or to, and I guess to Joe's family as well, or to go and hang out in Auvers. And guess what they're going to do? And how's Van Gogh going to feel about that? And I think you've got to ask a very simple question, which is, when Theo and Joe go to Holland, why doesn't Vincent go with them? It's like this family reunion in summer. They all go off to I guess it's Noonan. Why doesn't Van Gogh go with them? Let's just see what you guys say about that. Carla says, it's been quite some time I've heard that wonderful voice. Thanks a lot. Stephanie, what do you think the answer is to that? Why do you think Van Gogh doesn't go with them to Holland? Censored Nana says they did not listen, they did not know how. The reason I'm asking Stephanie does actually have this book. She's also ordered this book, and she's participated in a previous live. So any idea, Stephanie, why Vincent wouldn't have gone with his brother to home? Okay, so I'll leave that question out there. So it's quite a good point. Was he not invited? How can I put it? I suppose that is a point. He wasn't technically invited, but you could kind of imagine him inviting himself in a way. He was that kind of guy. The other side of it is, do you think he would have been welcome if he did go? Do you think his mother and sisters would have been happy to see him earless and still carrying the shame of what happened in Old, because they all knew about it, and on the occasion of sort of wanting to celebrate the good side of the family with Theo. That's kind of what I mean. So, he does have contact with family members. He writes to Bill, and he sometimes writes to his mother, not that often, but here and there. He writes to Theo all the time, writes to Bill sometimes, Wilhelmina, and then here and there to his mother, but not at all to his other two sisters, and not at all to his other brother, Cor. Do I have that book here? So some of you may or may not know that Van Gogh actually had a second brother, Cor van Gogh, who actually came to South Africa and who died in South Africa, this guy. And they weren't really big pals. They weren't. They didn't seem to really like each other. Remember, Vincent was like the black sheep of the family, and Theo and him had a good relationship, but he didn't really have a great relationship with the rest of his family, especially his other two sisters. And that comes across in this book, the Van Gogh sisters. So he's got 3 sisters, so there were 6 siblings in all, 3 girls, 3 boys. And this book starts off, this is just a different book. It starts off, did I underline it here? Vincent, when he was approaching his 32nd birthday, when his father died and still living in the family home, had become more and more of a nuisance to his parents. Not long after the funeral, Anna, the eldest of the Van Gogh sisters, and Vincent had an explosive argument over Vincent's continued presence at the family home, which she and her siblings felt threatened not only his mother's well-being, but also the family's standing in the village. It was this confrontation that provoked Vincent to leave his home. Then on page 11 here, just quickly going a little bit out of this to make my point. This is page 11. Vincent and Wilhelmine were both different from their sisters Anna and Lies, and from their brothers Theo and Cor, in their rejection of society's prevailing norms. They were both socially engaged and very creative, and shared a deep interest in religion, art, and literature. They both remained unmarried and never had children. So it's quite interesting, isn't it? So what I'm trying to just portray here is, although Vincent's lonely, he's also kind of an outcast in terms of his family, right? And that is aggravating the loneliness to some extent, but he's not an outcast in terms of his entire family. There are 2 or 3 family members who are, the Afrikaans is goedgesind, which means positive towards him. It's not quite the same. They've kind of got a positive attitude, or at least they are nice to him, right? So Censored Nana says, listen to the song Starry Night. Okay. Glad you made it, PW. Good to have you here. Yeah, they're kind of, well, I don't know if they're fond of him, but they understand him and they put up with him. Maybe to some extent they are fond of him, but he is someone that brings up a lot of drama and issues, and is quite needy and so on. Which you don't often have, I think, with the eldest kid. I think you often have it with the middle child or the youngest child. But anyway, this is what I want to emphasize. 9 months earlier, so 9 months before, he was talking about painting wheat fields under, what is it? Stormy skies. Anyway, he wrote this letter. So 9 months earlier, he wrote the following. What I need is courage, and this often fails me. And it is also a fact that since my disease, when I'm in the fields, I'm overwhelmed by a feeling of loneliness to such a horrible extent that I shy away from going out. But this will change all the same as time goes on. That was written from Saint-Remy, from the Asylum, on the 19th of September, 1889. So what he's actually saying there was that he is actually so lonely at this asylum, he's overwhelmed. Not only that, he kind of at the same time says his courage is failing him, he also says this will change as time goes on. So he's kind of saying, this is happening to me, but I expect it'll improve. And it's quite important to read the original letter. I'll put a link to that in chat so you guys can see it. Thunderclouds, that's it. And this is why it's so important to see things in context. It's also why we're going to all this trouble to go through. We're not just dealing with the day that he is shot or shoots himself. We're dealing with the 2 months preceding that, because you need to see it in context. Even that is maybe not enough. You need to know what kind of beliefs he had, what kind of background he had, his attitudes to women. You need to go way back in time to get all of that. And so sometimes in true crime, you may think all you need is just at the crime scene, that's going to give you everything. But then sometimes there's so much intrigue and dynamics and these subtle layers. A really good example is the John Benet Ramsey case. You make a big mistake where you just look at the evidence and you say, okay, what is going on here? Because you've got a ransom note and all these other different things. And when you go into family dynamics, it's a very tricky, slippery thing, because you tend to see what is true maybe in yourself and your relationship with your family, not in terms of these people themselves. Danielle Lee says, sometimes there's a certain obligation to be kind or understanding to your family members just because they're family. I wonder if Vincent felt that at all, like he was a burden. Well, that definitely comes up in July, where he does feel like a burden. And that may also address this question of why did he not go with Theo? Bear in mind, he's lonely. His brother's going to have this nice little family reunion. He hasn't seen his own family. He hasn't seen his mother or sisters in years. Why would he not go there? Well, he has been feeling like a burden, but he's also feeling embarrassed about what has happened. And I think another side of it is he doesn't want to go there and they argue with him, criticize him, and then you have arguments and confrontation. That's going to set him back. Right? If you think that he's got is in a fragile mental state, remember he's trying to rebuild himself, then going to see his family may not be the best thing. On the other hand, it may have been a good thing. Sometimes if you don't have a great relationship with family, don't see them, and then you do see them, and you have a great time together, it's like, wow, why did we not see each other for such a long time? Jean Carris, well done. Good to see you here. So in terms of this letter, the first point to make is to acknowledge that he was lonely, but also to be clear that he had been struggling with loneliness for a long time, for at least the previous 2 years off and on. And I would go so far as to say much longer than that. I think when he went to live in London, he probably was lonely as well. Being away from home, and I mean, he left home quite young, I think 16 years of age. I've been in that situation. I lived in South Korea for 4 or 5 years. I was extremely lonely at times there as well. There were other times where I was having a great time. I lived in England where I was extremely lonely for a while, and there were other times I was having a great time. So I think it fluctuates, but I also think the fact that someone's lonely doesn't mean that they haven't learned how to deal with it or they haven't been there before. If you're lonely and within that loneliness you have a lot of crises, that can make it feel a lot lonelier, right? And so the question is, were there crises in Orvez? So to express that point a bit further, Van Gogh was very lonely in the asylum. Well, guess what he's got to deal with? He doesn't have an ear. Whether he's cut his ear off or someone cut it off, just that thing, just the fact that he's lost his ear, he's kicked out of all, the whole ambition to have a artist retreat in the south with Gauguin, all of that has just been lost. And so he's had to come out of that devastation, and he's lonely. And that you've got to admit is a very horrible place to be. Just imagine this in human terms. Imagine if you got kicked out of not just your home, but the city that you live in, right? So it's like, we don't want you here. And then you are so miserable that you admit yourself to kind of a rehab in a way, right? You admit yourself in rehab and like you've lost a finger or a toe or your ear or something, and your family aren't even coming to see you. In other words, you've got to dig yourself out of that hole. And Van Gogh did. That's the point I'm trying to make. Let's look at some of your comments. Nisi said, good to see you here, Nisi. Better late than never. Good evening, everyone. Bridget says, every one of us felt lonely no matter how many people are in our lives. Our personal experience of life is like no one else's experience. It doesn't mean you commit suicide. Okay, so the amazing thing with that particular extract where he says that he's so lonely that he shies away from going out. If you backtrack into the context of that letter, so if you actually go to that letter and you just go backwards a little bit to see what got him to this point, and I think he says it at the very end of this letter. He talks about, almost as an afterthought, he says, I'm overwhelmed by these feelings of loneliness, and it's so horrible that I don't even want to go out, right? If you backtrack just a little bit to paragraphs above that, he clarifies, and bear in mind this is written in the very late summer of 1889. The events that we're dealing with in this are the sort of middle of summer, early to middle of summer 1890, right? So a little bit less than a year later. And so he clarifies, he says, it is splendid weather outside, but for a long time, 2 months to be exact, I've not left my room. I don't know why. What I need is courage, and this often fails me. And it is also a fact that since my disease and when I'm in the fields, I'm overwhelmed by feelings of loneliness to such a horrible extent that I shy away from going out. So what he says there, so just with a bit more context, is clarifying that, the weather is beautiful outside, it's stunning outside, but for 2 months, so for 2 months of that summer, arguably July and August, or let's say mid-July and August, half of the month of July and August up until the middle of September, he hasn't left his room. I don't know whether that means he hasn't painted, but he certainly hasn't gone out and painted in plein air, painted the landscape, right? And so you don't have any of this in Orvez. You don't have him staying in his room and not painting. You don't have him so overcome by loneliness that he doesn't venture out. He's progressed beyond that point in Orvez, right? Stephanie asks, is the disease he's talking about depression? It could be. I don't really think it is. I think he's imagining that he has some disease. And I actually think it's a combination of him drinking so much and a combination of what he does when he drinks, going to the brothel, and a combination of the syphilis. So it's a combination of the one aggravating the other, aggravating the other. And so as a result of his wanton lifestyle, his gratuitous lifestyle, he does actually have a disease. He doesn't really know what the disease is, but by being in the asylum and being lonely, it's really good for him in terms of the bacteria is not being activated, and he is in a way resting, I guess, and so he's being able to some extent overcome an infection that he definitely has. That is different to Theo. Theo, I believe, has got the same disease, but he's just carrying on as normal, and believing he doesn't have a disease, right? The thing is, Van Gogh would be fairly normal, but then he would totally get unhinged, and that would make him sicker, if that makes sense. He would go on drinking binges and, just running around, like a crazy person, and that's not good for you. So bear in mind, when he lost his ear, it was like Christmas, it was middle of winter, running around and, getting drunk in those circumstances can't be good for your health. When I was in South Korea, there was an American who stayed with me who arrived there and just wanted to party, and got sick very, very quickly, and got pneumonia, and he was even coughing blood, but he kept insisting on partying, and he just got sicker and sicker and sicker. And I think it's a similar sort of situation. This was also in the middle of winter. He wanted to come there and have a great time, and he just insisted on having a good time, and he did get sick. The thing that I tried to tell him, and that other people told him, was, it doesn't matter who you are, when you come to South Korea as a Westerner, you often get sick from the air is quite polluted. It certainly was when I went there. The air is quite dirty, and it takes a while for your body and your lungs to adjust to that. And so I remember just also having a sore throat and a cough for a long time, not being terribly sick, but just not being so well. And then, although I wasn't 100% healthy, I went for a jog one day, and I kind of coughed some of the gunk out of my throat. And from then on, I was kind of healthy. So, but he just like, oh, I'll just, I'll be fine. He just went out, he got sick, he got sicker and sicker and sicker. I'm using that as an analogy for Van Gogh. When you are in that spirit of, licentiousness or whatever, in the middle of winter, and you are sick, but you carry on, you can't stop yourself. You can get very, very, very sick. And that is what I believe happened. I think him and Gauguin partied up a storm. I think Gauguin is like a hedonist and wasn't a very good. I think Van Gogh thought he was a good influence on him, but I really don't think he was a good influence on him. Sharon says, what a shame that there was no cure then for syphilis and gonorrhea. Bridget says, he hasn't been drinking like crazy for some time. He's detoxed, absolutely. He's cutting out the depression exacerbated by alcohol. And, when he goes to Auvers, he's kind of like cleaned up his act. He's not drinking, he's not womanizing, he's just painting. That's all he's doing, which is why he's able to paint. So the point I want to make just with this is Van Gogh when he felt loneliness was getting too much, he stopped painting. He couldn't paint. In 1889, he put his brushes away for 2 entire months, not like 2 days or 2 weeks. For 2 entire months, about 60 days, which is about the same period he spent in Auvers painting every single day. So what this tells us is he found his courage. He found his courage to leave the asylum, but he also held his courage while he was in Orvez. And where he'd failed previously, he succeeded in finding his mojo in Orvez. And just think about it, he meets up with this doctor. The doctor thinks he's awesome. Apparently, the doctor lets him paint his portrait, lets him paint his daughter's portrait, lets him paint his garden, says, my home is your home. He is getting along very well with the innkeeper, to the extent that he paints the innkeeper's daughter. He paints either the neighbor's little child or the innkeeper's sort of infant child holding an orange. And so I'm sure he was still lonely when he was in Orvez. He just wasn't overcome with it or by it in the same way that he was in Al. In Al and in Saint-Remy, it was really bad. In Orvez, he was coming out of his hole. It was like triumphant. It was like a resurrection. So the other thing to communicate here is we see Van Gogh struggling. This is such an important point. I'm talking about September 1889. The thing to communicate here is we see Van Gogh struggling and telling someone about it. He says, I'm feeling lonely. He writes it in a letter, I'm feeling lonely. He doesn't just say it in one word. He says, I'm trying to find my courage. I'm trying to deal with it. I'm sure it'll get better. Also, I haven't gone out for 2 months. I don't know what's wrong with me, but blah, blah, blah. So when he's not feeling great, he tells somebody about it, right? And so the question is, did he forget to do that for 70 days while in Orvez? Did he just forget to say, well, I'm actually feeling suicidal. I'm actually feeling depressed. I'm actually feeling unhappy. Oh, I just forgot to tell anyone that. I've kind of been saying all along that Van Gogh is an expressive person. He's expressive in his art. He's expressive in his letters. His letters aren't short little letters. They're long letters. He's expressive in his letters to the extent that he even has sketches in his letters. His letters are even like works of art and sell for millions because they're not just little scribbly little letters. And I think Van Gogh was such an expressive person that if you were around him, like a lot of people are like, wow, Van Gogh's so awesome, he's so amazing. If you had to go and have lunch with him or have a drink with him or God forbid, live with him, sorry, he would probably chew your ear off. He would talk so much that you would be like, can you please shut up? Like, I'm trying to have a conversation with you, and can you just hold on, right? I think that's kind of, and I'm trying to just say that he's a very expressive person, and he was trying to talk in terms of his art. Something that I meant to mention when I was on the StreamYard with Stephanie was he's got all artists kind of, it's actually a defect. It's not really a talent. Most people have filters in their brains where their senses know how to sort of turn down the volume of certain things, right? So that what you're perceiving gets brought down to an acceptable level, right? With artists, it's often all of it's just unfiltered. It's this rush of, it's almost like Superman who can hear and see everything, hears and sees everything, and actually drives him crazy. And so that's why you need to be able to tune out certain things and tune in, focus on what you need to focus on. And so the impression I kind of get is when Van Gogh was in the landscape, he would be seeing and hearing certain things. And how do you convey hearing sounds in a picture? How do you convey, for example, if the wind's blowing over the grass and the grass is singing and the grass is rippling, it's also making a sound. But how do you convey that sound in a painting? A painting is silent when you look at it. If you look at a painting, the painting is not like this photo behind me. There were sounds when I walked through these trees. There were sounds that, the branches were moving a little bit like that. How do you convey that? Well, kind of with those energy lines. Does that make sense? just look at some of your comments. His letters were works of art in addition to his artwork. Nisi says, expression overflows into his personal life. Seems he would have no problem telling someone he was suicidal. I don't know if he would say I'm suicidal, but I do think he would say I'm struggling, I'm really frustrated, I'm unhappy or whatever, right? Danielle says, would you go have a drink with him? Yeah, in a way I did. I went to Orvez, I sat at the table I thought that he sat at, and I sat there alone. And I kind of thought, when I was sitting there, I thought, I'm the only one here who's really having the authentic Van Gogh experience, meaning if you want to know what it's like to be Van Gogh, go and do something by yourself. Go and walk in a field alone. Go and eat a meal in a I guess a busy restaurant by yourself. That's the Van Gogh experience. So I was the only one there sitting alone and trying to, I guess, channel Van Gogh or whatever. But yeah, interesting question. Would I go have a drink with him? Yeah, sure. But I think we would argue because he's a very opinionated person, and I guess I am as well. But I would probably want to say something at some point as well, and he'd probably be like, "You said this about me, and I'm so blah 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 blah," and I'd be like, "Okay, can I explain?" Anyway. Patricia says, in Orvez, each day seemed to be getting better and better for Vincent. He appeared to be maturing. Bridget says, Gauguin seemed like a creep to me, not a good friend at all, very selfish, and as you said, hedonistic, all about him. That is such a good point, because Van Gogh, although he can be selfish, and his own brother said that, that he can drink and be a certain way. He was also quite a sensitive guy and quite a thoughtful person in a way. I mean, I think all artists are quite self-absorbed, which may make them seem selfish, but compared to Gauguin, I think Van Gogh was a lot more considerate. Bridget said, I really love your photographs. I haven't seen this one clearly enough on this particular device. Last week, the contrast of that deep, deep blue on the corner flashing to bright white was magic. Thanks for that, Bridget. I've got a couple of others that I want to show you, but some of them have got glass in front and it's not going to show off very well. Stephanie says he wouldn't be fond of me. I'd tell him he could paint my garden, but not my portrait. Yeah, well said. Yeah, I mean, I would also say to Van Gogh, I think you'd say, you might be like, please, if you could go back in time, please, what do you think of my art? What do you think of this? Just be honest. I'd say, I think this is terrible. I think this portrait is actually horrible. I would never, ever hang it in my house. Oh, okay. I think that landscape's pretty good and I like that. But your portraits, which you are so passionate about, I think are pretty horrible. And I don't think he liked that very much. And I don't think he liked it. I don't think he liked what Paul Gauguin said to him. I think I'm going to just try and find just quickly that artwork that I mentioned was where Paul Gauguin painted Vincent van Gogh as a sort of Christ-like figure with very orange hair. Here it is. Okay. The Mount of Olives. So I remember mentioning this to Stephanie, and I think Stephanie was quite shocked. Cottenstar makes a really good point. He's sort of like cutting through the crap. He says, in reality, you would all have to pay to have Van Gogh paint you. Well, that's now. Back then, he was struggling to find sitters, right? P.A. Farm Girl, his brushstrokes showed energy, sounds, feelings, and chaos. I often feel like he's showing the throbbing electricity of life and of the now, you know. Patricia says, I would prefer to be painted by Klimt. Okay. Wow, Danielle says, I would love for him to paint my portrait. I don't care how bad it would be. Okay. Have you actually seen these portraits of Adeline Revue? This beautiful young 12-year-old who's actually, he says, is 16 to his brother. And then she looks, I don't know, as unlovely as I guess he could make her. Okay. Nisi says, Dali would be my choice. Okay. Okay, so let's go on here. So I said, if Van Gogh was struggling, you can imagine him telling someone about it. Think about it. He's writing letters to his brother virtually every day. He's got a doctor that he sees, either the doctor or a family member, almost every other day. Did he forget to do that in Orvez? Did he forget to tell anyone that he wasn't feeling very happy? And you even from the innkeeper's family, when they were asked afterwards, they were interviewed years later, you know, did you see this coming? Was he unhappy, whatever? And they're like, no, he was in a good mood. He was, we became friends with him, and, you know, he was blah, 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 blah. You know, the impression wasn't of this guy moping around or, you know, the classic lust for life thing of this Kirk Douglas gritting his teeth and suddenly being overcome by loneliness. That's like the classic myth. I mean, it's a classic myth. It's classically wrong. Now, in terms of Bailey's book, chapter 9 deals with portraits. Is it chapter 9? Chapter 9. So, yeah, chapter 9 is portraits. Chapter 10 deals with Gauguin, which we're not going to deal with. And then chapter 11 is really interesting, dealing with the day trip to Paris. And there's that picture that I've been talking about, the one where he says he expresses loneliness. So chapter 11 is really going to be interesting to look at. So below the chapter heading, he quotes Van Gogh's letters, as I said, where he talks about being passionate about painting portraits. He's effusive here, and he actually writes that he's much, much more passionate about portraits than other artists are. And then lower down on page 83, I've actually placed a big question mark alongside a line of text that reads, quote, to his sister Will, he wrote that potential buyers might see his work in Dr. Gachet's house, and then also he'll find me a few interesting models to do. So it seems like he wrote to his sister saying that I think Dr. Gachet is going to find me a few interesting models, right? On page 84, now think about this, You Lonely. What could be better than painting a person or painting a model? Someone is kind of forced to sit in front of you. And now if you are really, really lonely, you know, you spend a lot of your time literally walking alone in the countryside. Well, now you at very close quarters, and you are in the company of someone, and you allowed to, and you can take your time looking at their faces, looking at their clothing, and being at close quarters to a person. I'm not saying that is going to, you're suddenly not going to be lonely, but it's certainly allowing you access in a way to other people in a way that's kind of very different, right? On page 84, Bailey describes Van Gogh's portraits of Adeline Revue and a little girl holding an orange. I I'm going to show you this black and white portrait. Adeline looks quite attractive in it, don't you think? Look at this. This is a picture of Adeline Revue. Quite an attractive young woman, wouldn't you say? And then Van Gogh manages to make her appear pretty damn ugly when he actually paints her. Look at that. That's what she actually looks like. And that's the one picture of her. And there's another one, even worse, arguably. And then there's another one. Okay. Patricia says, I did the same in 2000, makes her look like an old-time puppet. Nisi says, if he's lonely, people must come to you. Cotton Star says, are there any current Van Goghs that have been heisted and still missing? Good question. I know that there was one or two recently that were stolen, but I think they've been not 100% sure of that. Not 100% sure. I kind of was under the impression that one was recovered, but I could be wrong. It's a good question. Patricia says, I love his painting of Blossom and the sky that he did for his nephew. P. Willie says, hi all, I visited Auvers-sur-Oise many years ago, walking the routes, that means the roads, the fields, the cemetery, where he's buried next to his brother Theo, sans any Catholic Christian, gave me a sense of his aloneness. Jean says, don't know, wouldn't the Nazis have stolen Van Goghs while they were in France? Well, the portrait of Dr. Gachet was actually taken from, I think, Groupil and Key and ended up in Nodelers. Nodelers in New York for a time, and it was literally taken out of the country to avoid that from taking place. P. Willie, if ever in Paris, highly recommend take the train north to visit. It wasn't as touristy back when I was there, so it seemed very intimate and gave a sense of going back to his time. Yeah, I must say, it wasn't as touristy as I thought it would be. I was there in May. Auvers wasn't like this overrun by tourists. Bridget says, not flattering at all, those portraits there. She has gorgeous eyes and he's totally skipped them. Misa Mom's here, good to see you. Been waiting, but we'll take a deep dive into Van Gogh. Terry Dean says, when you can't be around yourself around people, you don't want to spend much time with them. That's true. Patricia says, I often wonder what Vincent would make of his fame now. Yeah, I think he would be, quite amused. I think he would also be quite annoyed. I think he'd be quite annoyed by what people say about him and is not correct. Because he wanted people to see things in a certain way that he was trying to convey, and in terms of his art, that might be the case, but in terms of his life, I don't think that is the case. So, as I say, Van Gogh manages to make Adeline pretty damn ugly in his portrait. We know he did a second version of this portrait because he told Theo he did. The second portrait is just as ugly as the first, if not more so. And now he has some possible intertextuality in the artistic sense. He paints two portraits of Adeline Revue, gives her one of them. One is a derivative of the other. So why not two portraits of Dr. Gachet? Well, for all the reasons we've already mentioned, because it apparently slips Van Gogh's mind to mention a second portrait of Dr. Gachet, not likely. He writes to his brother, I gave her that portrait, but I've done a variant for you. And that's just Adeline Revue. That's just the innkeeper's daughter. He mentions her. He mentions doing a second portrait. Doesn't do that with Dr. Gachet. Not likely. As far as I know, he even did a third of Adeline Revue, which is arguably even worse. And yeah, pretty hideous. Amazingly, as Van Gogh's fame built up, particularly in the 1950s, so essentially 70 years ago, he actually only became, from 70 years ago, he became well known. People started to wonder about and care about the anonymous woman in blue. I must say, there's some artists who, a lot of their art is stunning. Rembrandt's a good example. With Van Gogh, it's a little bit hit and miss. There's some artworks that are pretty good. There's some that are amazing, like Starry Night. But those are almost like exceptions. There are a lot of Van Goghs that are terrible. Especially his early work is pretty terrible. And so you sort of wonder, I kind of sometimes wonder, okay, he did have talent and he did commit some acts of, iconic art, but would he have become famous if he didn't write any letters? If he didn't write a single letter, would Van Gogh ever become famous? And I have to say, I don't think so. So, he has a book just based on Van Gogh's letters. And so what I'm trying to say is, if you take the letters away, I don't think Van Gogh would have become famous. I think the letters enhance the story, and the story is why the art is worth so much, not so much the art itself being so artistically amazing, right? I'm not saying the art isn't impressive and different and original and creative. I'm just saying the story, because the story is so detailed and full of intrigue. That's why Van Gogh is such a big deal. Take away the letters, and I don't think he would have gotten anywhere. I don't think he would have, I really don't think so. Jean says, did he start painting at 30? I think somewhere around there. Bridget says, if you hadn't experienced depression and general melancholy, painting Dr. Gachet would certainly make you feel those feelings. Lamtoon says, without Joe, he wouldn't be known. Absolutely. Nisi says, the letters are integral for the backstory. Yeah. Okay, so amazingly, these portraits he did of Adeline Revue, nobody knew who she was. So it was like, okay, who is this? And they were only really asking that question in 1950, right? So, 60 years go by before someone goes, okay, Van Gogh's this big deal. Who is this person that he painted? And so Adeline herself was eventually called to account for herself in the painting. It was me. I don't really like the painting of me, but if you want me to talk about it, I will. And so she's now fairly elderly, but through Adeline's account, we get this visceral, authentic feeling for what it felt like to have Vincent van Gogh paint her portrait. Now, there was someone now in chat who said, I would love for Vincent to paint me. Well, it might not be as enjoyable as you might think. I don't get the feeling the experience was terribly as big a deal for Adeline as you'd imagine, right? So I'll put a picture up of Adeline in a moment, the real Adeline Revue, as an older person, but Bailey quotes Adeline Revue's recollection as follows. She said, quote, he did my portrait one afternoon and in one sitting. That's really important to remember. In one sitting. She sat down once and he did the whole thing. As I posed, he did not speak one single word to me. He smoked his pipe continually. He doesn't say a single word to her. Doesn't say, sit still. Well, it's a nice day today. Just paints. Kind of weird, isn't it? And so this is a photo of Adeline Revue, I guess, in the 50s. You've got to think how time changes context. At the time that he painted her, Van Gogh was a nobody. Now they're making movies about him and writing books about him, and suddenly he's somebody. He was a nobody when she knew him, and now he's kind of becoming world famous. From a local nobody to world famous. It's quite a jump. And that's just how the passage of time can change things. Maybe I should. Jean says if he had continued to paint, he would have improved over his lifetime. That's true. Patricia, that is very mean. That is very that is very mean, Patricia. But I think you're right. Nisi says boring and exhausting sitting. Stephanie says, why does he stretch the fingers so much? Good point. It really does stretch the fingers. He really does stretch the fingers. Maybe because he's an artist himself, maybe he sees the fingers as, I don't know, maybe he's trying to give a feline thing to women. I don't know. Bridget says, without the outlet of writing to Theo and expressing his experience and his development as an artist and getting feedback and interaction, then someone such as Vincent may well have ended his life. There's another side to it. If he wasn't an artist, he may have done something else. And so, with art and writing, any person is uniquely vulnerable to the acceptances and rejections of the world. So, you need, as an artist and as a writer, you kind of need people to at least give you credit to the extent that they look at your work, right? And when that doesn't happen, it feels like your life is invalidated. So being an artist is quite stressful in an existential way. You can also be a successful artist or writer, but then it's like, okay, at the moment that you've done something and people have been positive about it, it's like, okay, well, could you do it again? Could you do something again, and would that be accepted? And if you can't, you have that same kind of trauma. I mean, I've already thought, if I write another book, my 102nd book, am I going to know how to write? Am I going to be successful at it? And even if I write it well, are people going to be, they haven't read anything I've written for 5 years, 10 years, are they going to bother to even read a well-written book? What's that going to feel like? So I'm just saying there's a aspect to art and writing that on the one hand is great if people accept what you're doing, but it's a double-edged sword. For every good review, there's someone who can't stand you, who has a different opinion. For every, I put up a review on Scott Peterson's book that I wrote that is pretty amazing. Someone actually just said something on YouTube that I thought a great compliment, saying that I'm the next Sherlock Holmes, and I really respect, especially the way Benedict Cumberbatch presents investigation. I don't know if I'm like that, and I hope I'm not like that, like this horrible human being who's like a sociopath, but basically just, are you very, very sensitive to certain things when you're focusing on them? So I really appreciate that, but there are just as many people who have terrible things to say, and if anything, you remember those things. You don't remember, the compliments are good, but you don't necessarily remember them. Van Gogh, when he was positively reviewed by Albert Aureer, he felt like he didn't deserve what was being said there, which is quite sad. Patricia says the creative process is not easy. Fear of failure as an artist is extremely strong. Yeah, and I mean, it's just think of musicians like Fleetwood Mac, for example. Fleetwood Mac have made such amazing music, their Rumours album, and then after that, not really anything. So it's one thing to come up with something incredible. To sustain it's really difficult. Another good example is the writer John Grisham. I used to read everything he wrote, and then later on I just felt like it wasn't quite hitting the high notes that he did in the past, kind of thing. Misa Mom says it's revealing your fragility. Lamtoon says he was just painting so quickly, no time for fine-tuning the details. I must say I've found that writing books fast, writing quickly, in other words, when you get that creative impulse, so in terms of this, it's you're studying a true crime case and you're totally in it. You need to stay in that passageway, that tunnel. You need to stay with it for as long as you can. And that's when the magic happens. You can't expect to dive in and then come out to the surface. You're not going to be able to dive very deep if you do that. In other words, you dive much deeper if you dive down, you stay down there. It's a lot more of a costly thing, but what you produce at the end of the day is far more meaningful. Stephanie says each episode here with your script is you sharing your craft with us through a different media with a different lens. Nisi says sustainability can become a monster. Right brain creativity. Thanks for that, Patricia. Okay, so to a credit, so think about it. Adeline Revue could have been interviewed and someone said, wow, Van Gogh painted you. And she could have said, yeah, no, it was an amazing experience. And so I think he did a really good job. To her credit, she says, I wasn't very pleased. She's being honest. She says, it was even a disappointment. So when she saw, remember, she's sitting there all afternoon. When she sees what he's actually painted, she's like, wow, you kind of suck, right? And maybe she'd seen the portrait of Dr. Gachet. Maybe she'd seen the painting he did of the church at Orvez, and those are good executions, only to see the painting of her is pretty sucky, which I think it was. And so if you've seen the movie Loving Vincent, and Stephanie, I still can't believe you haven't, the way that Adeline Revue is depicted there, it's done so well. You get a sense of a youthfulness, you get a sense of, it's this almost fairy tale, this young French woman, even French girl, with a blue bow in her hair, a blue dress, blue eyes, and it just conveys that fairy tale quality just so well. I must say the artists from Loving Vincent did a fantastic job. Just have a look at this. That's really how he needed to convey her, right? And instead, you get that. I don't know whether he was trying to make her look older than she really was. I don't know if that's what was going on. But I mean, that's actually what she looked like. Okay. So the point you emphasize is that Van Gogh couldn't have been too lonely if he got to sit and paint someone all afternoon. And Bailey emphasizes halfway through page 86, that same month, Van Gogh also made 2 pictures of Dr. Gachet's 20-year-old daughter, Well, she may have been 21 by the time he did Marguerite Gachet at the piano. By the way, do you notice anything different in the nomenclature of the one portrait versus the other? In the one, it apparently takes 60 years to figure out who the woman in blue is. In the other, the sitter is absolutely well known, positively identified from the get-go. This either says something about the painter and how important he saw his subject, or it says something about the self-importance of his subject, or both. Makes sense? Bear in mind, the one is an innkeeper's daughter and she's not really named or identified. The other one is a doctor's daughter, a doctor who's got all these connections to well-known artists. Well, everybody now knows this is Marguerite Gachet, kind of thing. Oh, okay, wow, okay, you painted Marguerite Gachet. Curiously, it appears Van Gogh's portrait of Marguerite Gachet was inspired by an etching Dr. Gachet had done in 1873 of his wife Blanche. Let's see if I can show you that etching. This is the etching. As you can see, it's not terribly good. So that's an etching that Dr. Gachet did of his wife in 1873. I think she died 2 years later. And apparently Dr. Gachet's wife was musical and memorably musical, and her daughter continued with this family tradition. The point is, it wasn't just a portrait Van Gogh did of Marguerite. So it's not just Marguerite sitting by the piano. It is Marguerite both almost in the role that her mother once was in, but also the fact that her father had painted the same thing. It is Van Gogh almost showing Dr. Gachet how to paint this thing that he wanted to paint, if that makes sense. It's not just Van Gogh painting Marguerite in the way that it was Van Gogh painting Adeline Revue. You can imagine Dr. Gachet hovering around and them discussing how they're going to do this. And think about it, these two men, Dr. Gachet and Vincent, talking about how it's almost like a photographer trying to choreograph photographing a model. All this fuss about this particular person, it had to feel pretty good for Marguerite. She's sitting there, she's now become pretty important, right? And one's got to wonder, what is Paul thinking about all this? I mean, it's almost like Burke Ramsey and Jean Bonnet. Burke's never going to be Miss America. Well, Paul was never painted in any of Van Gogh's work. His dad was, his sister was, the garden was, but not him. How did he feel about that? Think about the fact that Paul Gachet was sort of very involved in bringing Van Gogh's work to the public. So how did he feel that he's not really part of the story? Well, he certainly made himself part of the story. Stephanie says, Nick mentioned after we finish the Van Gogh's finale series, a watch party. Okay, so yeah. Can you wait that long, Stephanie? You can always watch it twice. So, the point is, it wasn't simply a portrait Van Gogh did of Marguerite. It was, in a sense, Marguerite stepping into the shoes of her mother. And bear in mind, she'd also just reached maturity at 21. I don't know whether it was such a big deal in the late 19th century or the way that it kind of is now. Now, when you turn 21, you have a big party and so on and so on. Well, I'm not sure what it was like then. We know that Van Gogh was actually invited to a party. So one does imagine it was quite a big deal. I'm talking about Marguerite's birthday party. It's possible there were all sorts of thoughts bubbling through her mind as Van Gogh painted her. That's the other side to think about. Forget about what Van Gogh is thinking. Here she is. She's recently turned 21, and Van Gogh is painting her, and she's having these ideas of herself, how important am I as a young woman? How desirable am I as a young woman? How beautiful am I as a young woman? How respected am I in society? Like they talk about an eligible bachelor. How eligible am I as a doctor's daughter? And here I am being painted by an artist my father really respects. And in terms of her father getting all excited about Van Gogh, what is that making her feel about Van Gogh? And now, the same artist who's painted her dad is now painting her. How does that make her feel? Doesn't that make her feel elevated in status? Doesn't that make her feel flattered? Doesn't that make her feel complimented? Doesn't that make her feel attractive? And doesn't that make Van Gogh a somewhat attractive person? Not like he's a nice family friend. He's now quite an attractive family friend. You get what I'm saying? It's possible there were, as I say, all sorts of thoughts bubbling through her mind. Bear in mind, this wasn't like a photo that's taken in a few seconds. She's got to sit there for half an hour, even longer, while this person is looking at her. And has she ever actually experienced that? I don't know. Has she experienced? It makes me think about that scene in Twilight where Bella is being stared at by this guy right next to her, and it's both troubling but also in a way powerful. It's a powerful thing. It's like, why is he looking at me, and what is he thinking, kind of thing. And one wonders whether you can apply that here. So it's just interesting to wonder what she may have been thinking. I don't want to really be too self-indulgent here, but I actually once, when I was at university, I actually posed, not naked, but almost naked, for art classes. It was just a way of making money, and I knew an artist, and she said, you can get paid, and I actually would take a book along or something that I needed to study for university, and I would read that while I was posing. But I was sort of wondering, what are these people thinking, right? It's a little bit different when you've got a room of about 12 people painting you or sketching you, and you are not really wearing very much. It definitely is. You are definitely thinking, not only what are they doing, not only what are they thinking, but what are you thinking? And I think I did it twice. And I think one of the reasons why they wanted me to model was, at that stage, I had like 7% body fat. I was in amazing, it was like world-class shape as a athlete. And I think, so in that sense, it was somewhat artistic, but it certainly felt pretty uncomfortable. I mean, it was like at least an hour long, and you had to stay in a certain position. In a sense, it felt very impersonal and also very personal, kind of in a way, in a weird way. And so one wonders, in terms of this particular thing, did Van Gogh not utter a word with her as he did with Adeline? Whether the two spoke or not, and I would imagine that he didn't speak to her, just because you've got an analogy here for how he paints a portrait, and you kind of get the idea that he concentrates a lot and is very in his zone. It's certainly, I think, very different to photography, where the photographer does need to. I've done quite a lot of photography, I guess, like that, and you do have to engage with, because it's actually very fluid. There's a lot of movement. So think about it. Did the two speak to one another? What were they thinking? Also, it's possible, given the length of time Van Gogh spent on the portrait of Marguerite, that he did speak to her. that she may have gotten quite bored. She may have said something like, look, if we're going to be doing this for a long time, at least talk to me, or something like that. Was Van Gogh aware that, and very conscious of, in profile, the different age, the body, the bosom of the doctor's daughter compared to the innkeeper's daughter? Is it like quite a, I don't want to say sexual experience, but is it quite a kind of, like a moving experience for him, where he's like, wow, she's really beautiful? Or bear in mind, he's almost like a prisoner that's been let out of prison, and now he's painting a doctor's daughter. You've got to see it in that light, that it's not like he's just coming off the street and he's a regular Joe. He is suddenly at close quarters with some young woman, a 12-year-old, as Stephanie says, who he tells his brother is 16, I don't know why, and then this 21-year-old. And is he, I can even tell you, yesterday when I went swimming, there was a young girl who I've spoken to before, who's training. She's like a really, really strong swimmer. She will sometimes swim. I asked her how far she's swimming, and I think she said 4 kilometers, but she says normally they would swim between 8 and 14. That's like world-class level. And she was training for, She was training for, I think, long course championships, and also ordinary swimming championships. But the point to make is, as someone doing what I'm doing, I don't encounter someone like that every day, like almost like a world-class level swimmer. In fact, when I wanted to swim, the whole pool was full of people, and she said something like, well, I'm a professional swimmer, you should swim over there. And I kind of made a joke and said, well, I'm actually also professional, I'm training for a half Ironman. But the point being, so let me just explain. There were lots of people swimming that were being coached, and then there's only a few lanes left because for the public, and so we were actually trying to use those lanes also for training. But anyway, so the point is, you are going to pay attention to someone who is out of your, I guess, field of experience in a sense. And so, I mean, it made me think when I spoke to it, it made me think of Van Gogh doing the portrait of a totally different setting, of course, swimming. But it made me think of Van Gogh painting Marguerite's portrait. And he's a man, he's a single man. He'd be viewing his sitter for a very long time. He's also a lonely guy. And so I wouldn't be surprised if he really enjoyed the experience. And isn't that why he said to his brother, I'm going to paint her again? And I kind of mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he really enjoyed the experience beyond in a purely artistic capacity. And we started this whole discussion saying that Van Gogh had said he's very passionate about doing portraits. And we also know in his backstory, can go quite far into the backstory to see that there's an impression that he would turn his muses into his mistresses. This had to do with prostitutes. This had to do with certain other people. This is what made his family very uncomfortable. And this is the classic thing that happens with artists. They have someone sit with them, they fall in love with them, they're looking at them, they fall in love with them. The sitter thinks it's very romantic, blah, 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 blah. And of course, Vincent van Gogh is reading about that very thing at that time. He's reading about painters painting women who become their mistresses, and then he's even giving these books to Dr. Gachet. And I don't know whether Dr. Gachet has read those books yet, but when he does, what's he going to think? Hi, Dr. Gachet, do you mind if I do another portrait of your daughter? Dr. Gachet is like reading this book. Kind of thing. Misa Mom says sensual. Susan Smith says Vincent's art has soul. When you see it, it seems alive. Good point. Patricia Burns says, I wonder if Vincent was trying to portray her as closer to his own age. Maybe, but I actually think it's more that Theo may have been aware of his brother's previous mischief, and it may also have been that Van Gogh was trying to almost inflate the importance of the painting. Because, I mean, a picture of a little child is not necessarily as significant as a picture of an adult, just in general. I'm not saying for sure, just that, let me put it this way. If Van Gogh had painted the portrait of Dr. Gachet, a doctor, an adult, that is far more important than a picture of his son. Do you know what I mean? It's there's more status in that situation, especially in the 19th century, right? But it certainly does make you think about what is going on in the sort of sexual sense with this artist. He's painting these young women who are, in terms of his age, definitely inappropriately young. And are there other inappropriate thoughts that are going on, right? And so this is the part that's the key insight. Van Gogh was very lonely. So here's this lonely guy, and he's also painting a young woman's portrait close to the time he was shot. And we know he wanted to do it again. She would have been a salve possibly to that loneliness. He spent a lot of time on this particular portrait. He didn't finish it off in an afternoon. It seems like he came back to paint it again. It seems like there was more than one sitting. And so who knows, given the books he was reading, I don't know whether, if Vincent van Gogh had given Dr. Gachet some of these books he was reading and Dr. Gachet went to Paris, would he have left the books at home and could Marguerite have sort of browsed through them, right? So who knows, maybe to some extent he felt less lonely when he was painting. And as I say, given the books that he was reading, perhaps he had a few fantasies about her brewing in his artistic brain. I really don't think it's a big leap to say you're reading about painters painting women who become mistresses. Vincent is a painter who's painting a woman, and isn't he thinking about it? I mean, he's single, his brother's married with a child, he's single, and isn't the thought passing through his mind? He also has a lot of time to think about it. He doesn't see her once, he sees her quite often. He's become kind of part of the family, so she would be quite trusting and familiar with him. And in loving Vincent, they definitely convey that familiarity. They convey a sense of something going on, whether it's a friendship, whether it's an unusual friendship, whether there's some kind of spark going on. Loving Vincent definitely touches on that idea. And I think it is an interesting aspect. It humanizes him. It also humanizes her. In fact, it humanizes the whole story of Van Gogh, not just as this troubled artist, but is a human being. And I think the unusual format of Marguerite Gachet's portrait, so the size of it being double his usual size, not like he just painted it like Adeline Revue. He went to the trouble to make it much bigger. It's also bigger than his portrait of Dr. Gachet. I think it gives away an element of Van Gogh's true passion. He had a lot invested in this. It was a big deal to him. And so the passion underneath the passion for the painting is what we are thinking about here. On page 87, we learn that Paul Gachet Jr. seemed to know the portrait of his sister was painted over the course of 2 days. So instead of just an afternoon, 2 days. I don't know whether this means Marguerite sat for 2 days, but it certainly appears Van Gogh took a lot longer working on Marguerite than his one afternoon, one sitting job. Even if he wasn't sitting with Marguerite in front of him, I think he was, but even if he wasn't, he'd be thinking about her. So if when you're painting a landscape, it's one thing to paint, okay, there's a tree, whatever. When you're painting a person and you're painting things like eyes, nose, lips, ears, you are thinking about them in a way that's a lot more intimate. If you're spending quite a few minutes painting someone's lips, what are you thinking while you're doing that? If you're painting their eyes and you're putting the color in their eyes or whatever, in this case, because she's turned, it's not quite like that, but you are quite aware of the shape of a person's form, right? And if you paint a lot of portraits, you're aware of how this shape is different to other shapes. So anyway, Bailey quotes Gachet Jr. saying the following, quote, he's talking about what he sees when Van Gogh painted his sister. He says, standing at his easel, Vincent stepped back, advanced, moved away, approached, stooped, one knee on the ground, rose, bowed, almost without stopping. So Vincent seemed pretty excited. Do you think that that is the right word I'm using to summarize that description? So again, Gachet Jr., Marguerite's brother, describes it as standing at his easel, Vincent stepped back, advanced, moved away, approached, stooped, one knee on the ground, rose, bowed, almost without stopping. Now, was he as excited? Was he as activated? Was he as whatever the word is, with Adeline Revue? With Adeline Revue, you kind of get the idea that he was just sitting there and he had the pipe in his mouth and he was like, maybe he was actually thinking of Marguerite Gachet while he was painting Adeline Revue, right? So Nisi says pure excitement, yeah. Lamtoon says it can lead to daydreaming. Stephanie says Paul Gachet is quite observant. I'm not sure I always trust what he says, but as you say. Another fascinating insight we get from Dr. Gachet's son is that Van Gogh apparently forgot his easel. Now, we're trying to make the case here that Van Gogh seems to be a little bit absent-minded more than usual, a bit more excited more than usual, and now apparently he forgets his easel. So he's so hasty or love-struck that he came to do a portrait and forgot to bring his paints. But the vital, I don't know if he forgot to bring his paints or if he forgot to bring his easel, but the vital issue here is that Dr. Gachet apparently lent him one of his easels. So you have a scenario here in the aftermath, in the post-truth of the case, that either Van Gogh painted from Dr. Gachet's easels, or one could argue you could expect to find an easel in Dr. Gachet's possession with Van Gogh's idiosyncratic colors mixed into it. And what have we been talking about? The possibility that Dr. Gachet faked the second portrait of Dr. Gachet. Well, he's now got the painting supplies of Van Gogh in his home, right? So he has the means and the opportunity to do that. Do you see now how and why the allegations of forgeries from the Gachet side of the equation isn't only tempting, but entirely plausible? In the middle of page 87, Bailey lets us know that this easel Van Gogh painted on in the Gachet home, which belonged to the doctor, of course, was preserved for decades and finally donated to the Louvre in 1951. Now, another thing to consider is that none of this is true, that Van Gogh didn't forget his easel, and I think it's possible that he didn't. To me, either way, it's quite an interesting story. But if Van Gogh didn't forget his easel, then how did this easel that's associated with Van Gogh, that Van Gogh painted from, how did it get to Gachet's house? Is that the occasion that the easel ended up at Dr. Gachet's house? Another thing to say is, okay, so if that's not Van Gogh's easel, then what happened to his easel, right? Important questions from a true crime perspective. So let me just repeat. oh, so that easel wouldn't happen to be the one Van Gogh abandoned when he committed suicide and then stumbled home. It didn't happen to grow legs and find its way from the wheat field to Dr. Gachet's home, did it? No. It was Dr. Gachet's easel. Oh, okay. Vincent just wanted it that day, and they decided in 1890, this is quite important, they decided in 1890 to preserve the paint splattered on it for the next 6 decades. In 1890, while he was still unknown, they decided, let's keep this easel the way it is and not touch it and not use it, even though it's Dr. Gachet's. Oh, really? On the other hand, if Vincent was there and got shot there and they hid away that easel, you can imagine nobody touching it because of the circumstances surrounding it. Does that make sense? Timmy, do you want to come? Hey? Do you want to come up here? Don't eat my pen. Nisi says flustered because it's her. I wouldn't be surprised. You certainly get the idea from the way he's painting her that he's not quite himself. You also get the idea from his backstory that he gets flustered around women. He certainly has experiences with prostitutes, but he doesn't seem to be quite as, like, how can I put it, there's something different going on with women. I kind of get the idea that he's an excitable guy, but he's also not a very good looking guy. And so he's not self-assured, but there's a little bit more self-assurance than usual when he's Orvez because of the way he's being treated. He's being treated with respect by a doctor, and then now he's like, oh, so I can, I can be. Anyway, let's read. Sharon says, after watching Loving Vincent, I think someone walked off with his supplies. Stephanie says, where did Van Gogh's art supplies go when he shot himself? Well put. Sharon says, his head was in the clouds, heart flutters. Think about the typical way we think about artists is that they tend to be more emotional than most of us. They tend to be more passionate than most of us. When you look at this book cover and you see Van Gogh here, what do you think this in the background is conveying? Do you think it's conveying this sort of turbid emotions, these tides of feelings that he's subject to, more so than a lot of other people, right? Patricia says he may have hidden the easel in his attic so that he wouldn't be suspected. Absolutely. Nisi says the treatment there took away some insecurities. I think so as well. Social insecurities. Bear in mind, his family aren't very happy with him and treat him perhaps with a bit of scorn and shame. He has another family that are treating him, that have sort of reset everything and are treating him almost like they're not holding anything against him, right? He's been given a chance of a fresh start, and he's taking that role with open arms, right? Okay, so let's go on here. At the bottom of page 87, Bailey emphasizes that after painting this extended length portrait of Marguerite, that she'd pose for him again. She'd pose for Van Gogh again. Well, didn't she? Didn't she pose for him again? And what is that all about? Where's that picture? Where did that happen? And isn't that when he got shot? When he went back, he's very excited here. Then a length of time goes by, who knows what he's thinking and dreaming about. When he goes back, is that when something happens? Also, if he didn't say a word to Marguerite, maybe he's thinking, wow, the next time I paint her portrait, I think I'm going to ask her how she's doing. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Or maybe they had a short little conversation. Maybe she'd said, you know, do you want me to wear this dress or something? Do you want me to wear a white dress or whatever? And he'd said, the dress is fine. And he thought, I should have said, it's a beautiful dress or something like that. And now when he's going to paint her again, he's going to, he's playing it like a movie through his mind kind of thing. And so it's becoming kind of a big deal for him. The question is also, was Dr. Gachet around when Marguerite posed the next time? Because I get the feeling Dr. Gachet may have been around when he painted his daughter the first time, basically showing him the etching of his wife and sort of supervising everything. The question is, was Dr. Gachet around when Marguerite posed the next time? Another thing to mention is an interesting little twist with Adeline. When Van Gogh told his brother he was painting Adeline, he inflated her age from 12 to 16. Now, the question is, did he do that on purpose or was that an innocent mistake? He wrote on 24 June, quote, "This week I've done a portrait of a young girl of 16 or so. She's the daughter of the people where I'm staying." Any reason you can think of why he might inflate her age? Any reason he might not be completely honest with his brother? Or did he simply innocently guess her age wrong by about 4 years? Is there much of a difference between a 12-year-old and a 16-year-old? On page 88, the last page of the chapter, we get some more juicy meat and potatoes post-truth served on a giant platter by Paul Gachet Jr. He tells us that Van Gogh did indeed come over for that second portrait of Marguerite, but the sketch he did got damaged. Oh. He describes that part in kind of microscopic detail, how he placed the paper under a stone. So he did a sketch of his sister. Van Gogh did a sketch of Marguerite, and then he put the piece of paper under a stone, but then when he picked it up, he tore it. And so Van Gogh apparently scrunched it up in a ball, threw it away, and abandoned the project. Really? In other words, to abandon the project means he just didn't continue painting Marguerite Gachet. Really? Do you think that that is likely? Censored Nana says, I need to sleep. I'm a state servant and tomorrow's a work day. Good show. God bless. Thanks for being here. Becky says, good evening. Good evening, Becky. I'm kind of about to wrap up. Nisi says, inflated it for his own mind so he doesn't think he has feelings for a child. It's possible, but this seems unlikely because he did paint even younger children. Maybe it's not that. It could be he's trying to make the painting seem more important. I don't know. Maybe it is just an innocent error. Sharon says, I wonder if Marguerite told her father that she had feelings for Vincent and it pushed Dr. Gachet to do something desperate. That could also be the case. It could also be that Dr. Gachet reads this book about artists and muses and then says to his daughter, I hope you're not getting any ideas with this artist. You better not, I hope there's not going to be any mistress stuff going on here, over my dead body kind of thing. And then that puts the thought into her mind, right? And then maybe she mentions that to Vincent almost as a joke. Can you believe my dad is worried I'm going to become your mistress? Ha, 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 ha. And then Vincent's like, ooh, right? Cowboy Don. Okay, Jimmy, come. Jean's, I think, on her way out. Thanks for making it, Jean. Educational live as always. Jean's from Boulder, Colorado, so I think the time there is pretty late. But thanks for joining us. Nisi says, I could see him testing his daughter with the no hanky-panky. I'm actually in a situation where my father right now doesn't want my sister to be seeing a certain, I don't want to say boy because it's not a boy, but I won't say anything more about that, but it happens, definitely does happen. Good, anyway, good point, Sharon. Good point in terms of that. So I don't think that. So this is something I didn't mention in my script. Is that could this damaged paper not have been damaged in a scuffle that led to Vincent being shot? So it could have been Paul not happy that Vincent's painting his sister's picture, and a family member basically telling Van Gogh to go home, and Van Gogh being very upset at being interrupted and being confronted. And there's this sort of tussle over this sketch, causing it to tear, causing a confrontation, causing a actual, in other words, the torn sketch, which could or could not be true, is a clue to the actual confrontation, where it happened, how it happened, and who was involved with it. Not Dr. Gachet, but his son, right? I'm just saying it's something to think about, that the destruction of Van Gogh's body is associated with the destruction of this particular artwork, and the sensitive little things that were in play with Dr. Gachet's daughter, right? Just something to think about. In the art newspaper, this was written by Martin Bailey, dated 6 November 2020, so quite recently. This is very recent information that's coming out about Van Gogh, 130 years after the fact, right? Quote, the new evidence that Van Gogh began work on the harmonium picture is found in a 1961 document by Dr. Gachet's son. So this is also very recent. You know, if you take the fact that Van Gogh died in 1890, 1961 is 71 years later. So 71 years after the fact, a document is kind of unearthed, suddenly like this, like abracadabra, voila, look at this. And who unearths it? Dr. Gachet's son. He says he recorded, Paul Gachet's son, Paul Gachet Jr., Paul recorded that his sister Marguerite had posed with the harmonium in the family home in Auvers-sur-Oise, the village where Van Gogh lived for the last few weeks of his life. Okay, so why didn't Van Gogh write about that? That would have been a big deal. Why didn't he write about that? Was he keeping that part of his life secret from his brother? Gachet Jr. was age 17 at the time. This is again quoting from Bailey's article. So Martin Bailey wrote this book, and this chapter is dealing with portraits. Now, this is just an article by the same writer dealing with the same subject matter. He was 17 years old at the time of Van Gogh's stay. He recalled in the document that the Dutchman had drawn a light charcoal sketch of Marguerite at the harmonium in preparation for a painting. Wanting to preserve the charcoal sketch, Van Gogh used a fixative liquid on the reverse and then laid it on a stone in the garden to dry. That's the garden of Dr. Gachet. And so we've got all of these details from Paul Gachet. Oh, so she was by the harmonium. He did a charcoal sketch. He used a fixative liquid. He put it on the reverse. He even laid a stone on it in the garden to dry. That's incredible detail from Paul Gachet. Wow, what a memory. And what a memory after the passage of like 71 years, right? Unfortunately, the drawing then stuck to the stone, and when he tried to pick it up, it tore. Annoyed by the accident, the artist destroyed the sketch by scrunching it up into a ball and abandoned the project. I just don't see that happening in a million years, because what he could also have done is taken that sketch that he's done and done the sketch on a canvas, and there you go. You know, for the sketch to tear means it was probably a paper sketch or something, but he could still use that and use that to do the actual thing. The other thing is he just never would have abandoned the project. You know, if he did have feelings for Marguerite and it was a big deal painting any one of the Gachets, would you let something like that stop you, right? I just find it a bit suspicious that Paul Gachet says nothing about it for 71 years. and then when Van Gogh becomes well known, oh, by the way, so in the 50s, Van Gogh became well known, and then after about 11 years, Paul Gachet suddenly remembers something. And not only that, it says the document, which is to be deposited in the archive of Amsterdam's Van Gogh Museum, this is in 2020, was discovered in the papers of Samuel Del Sal, who died in 1978. Hey, my dog is eating a pen. You know, they talk about the pen is mightier than the sword, but a puppy, a young dog is mightier than the pen. Hey, you're not eating that pen either. Naughty dog. So it goes on to say, okay, he was a member of the family Vincent had lodged with. This is Samuel in the Borinage. That was in 1880, blah, 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 blah. And then in the late 1950s, this guy, Samuel, became friends with Gachet Jr., who gave him the signed document. It seems a bit too good to be true. So Paul Gachet gives him this document. Oh, great. Okay, thanks. What adds weight to the story is the fact that in 1908, Gachet Jr. had made a copy of Van Gogh's destroyed sketch in oil paints. Wow, so you're saying that 18 years after the fact, that means you fished the sketch out of the trash, or you kept it all along, even before he was famous, and then right? It seems a bit odd, doesn't it? And again, I'm saying, if something happened where Van Gogh was shot under these circumstances, you could imagine all of the stuff associated with that would be secreted away. But then Van Gogh becomes famous, and then you just change the narrative. And now you are Van Gogh's memory, and you are telling his story, as you have with, you have in true crime, you have people coming after the fact and taking on the story of the person that they've actually killed, right? And that is what we're trying to determine in the Barry Morphew case right now. Is what Barry's saying really happened, or is he benefiting in a way from telling the story in a way that suits him, when in fact, the question is, was he, Timmy, if I leave you, you're going to eat another pen, hey? Do you guys see what I'm saying? Stephanie says a cover-up. Sharon says it's a real eye-opener that history told may actually be untrue. Think about the history unfolding right now of the Ukraine war, and there's all sorts of things that they're saying that later turned out not to be true. The guys that apparently died on Snake Island, not true. The ghost of Kiev, this pilot that's apparently shot down so many planes, not true. But that's on both sides, happening on both sides. Nisi says secondhand information is so frustrating, very suspect. What a memory, yeah. Controlling the narrative, that is happening so much. Tapo EMT, there's Timmy. Hi, Timmy. How's that? Yeah. I don't know how many dogs there are that do that, really. Okay. I think we're almost done here. We're almost done. Don't want to go too far over the hour mark. I know some of you guys have got jobs and lives and children and families. Okay, so I've just written here, so he fished the scrunched up sketch out of the trash and he kept it for 18 years. This is when Van Gogh was totally unknown. And then Bailey writes, although the painted copy has disappeared, Vassier unearthed a black and white photograph. The painted copy is gone, but a photograph of the copy still exists. which he's publishing for the first time now. This is in 2020. He believes that it represents a faithful copy of the composition. I myself wonder if it is more of a homage loosely based on Van Gogh's original idea. Wow, so the original doesn't exist, but there's a photograph of the original. Interesting, isn't it? And there's so much of this weird stuff going on in the Van Gogh aftermath, where you wonder, bear in mind, if something is true, it suddenly becomes worth millions. So, in other words, if this photograph of a document is authentic, then it suddenly becomes worth millions as a photograph that the Van Gogh Museum might buy or whatever. I don't know how much of it is BS. I think some of it might be BS, but it certainly gives you this weird thing of where you've got a theory that Van Gogh was shot when he went to the Gachet home and something happened with him and Marguerite, and his father or his brother were very upset about it. Well, here you now have a story from Paul Gachet himself where he did return to the house, did have this extended contact and access with Marguerite, and there was something weird that happened that went wrong, such as the sketch not being completed, right? So one wonders, is it completely untrue? Is it partially true? What is actually going on here? Welcome, Yvonne. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Lynn says, my schnauzers never did that. My Norwegian Elkhounds do occasionally, but not on cue. Oh, okay. Stephanie says, glad you made it to pop in here and say hi and hear Timmy. Nisi says, he left alive and standing controls the narration. Okay. So here you have Dr. Gachet's son paying almost obsessive attention to the fact that some dude is painting his sister. Not only that, you have him acknowledging him copying Van Gogh's work. Let me say that again. Here you have Dr. Gachet's son paying almost obsessive attention to the fact that some dude is painting his sister. It's almost something you could think about in the John Benet Ramsey case. Would Burke Ramsey have paid much attention to people photographing his sister? Would he have said, hey, don't you want to take a photo of me? Look, here's me wearing a cowboy hat. No, Burke, we don't really need you to do that. Hi, I'm actually a Boy Scout. You want to take a photo of me in this? No, thanks, Burke. We're good here, right? And so he's paying obsessive attention to what's going on. Not only that, you're acknowledging him copying Van Gogh's work. But the real question here is this. Do you think it's true that if he intended to paint Marguerite a second time and he had a little setback, like a piece of paper tearing, do you think he'd get annoyed, throw it away, and abandon the project? There's like another pen lying on the ground that Timmy wants to eat. So I can't let him go there, and I can't have him on here either. So what do you guys think about that? Do you really think, okay, Timmy, I'm not going to let you eat that pen. The author is mightier than the dog is mightier than the pen is mightier than the sword. Sharon says, wait, the brother is the forger? Well, the brother could be the forger. It could also be the brother and the dad. It could be that they are partners in something, right? Doesn't that make sense? So, guys, that's my story. I'm quite impressed that there were, at some stage, I think 60, 70 people in chat. For Van Gogh, that's pretty good going. I think you'll agree that the people in true crime that turn their nose up at this are missing out. It's a really interesting story, isn't it? It's got a lot of detail, a lot of complexity. It can really rival some of the other cases that we're working on. Would you agree? Stephanie says, like father, like son. Lamb Toon says, I think it was the brother. Nisi says, sounds like a lot of anger and jealousy. Could be. Bear in mind, it's one or two paintings, and it's over the period of a month or two. It's not really that long. Stephanie says, fascinating. I think so too. So I think the next episode is going to be even more fascinating, where Vincent goes and visits his brother in Paris. Bear in mind, we've been talking about him being lonely. Well, now he's going to visit his family. And that's quite a busy social thing. He doesn't only visit his brother, there are a lot of friends that are there as well. So, he's definitely a lot less lonely than he was in Saint-Remy. And I made the point that it would make far more sense if Van Gogh was in Auvergne having a good time with friends and family, painting well, and then he went to Saint-Remy, right, from Auvergne, then he went to Saint-Remy, and then now he's suddenly alone, and then he would have committed suicide then. That makes sense. It doesn't make sense that he would leave Saint-Remy where he was miserable, go somewhere else where he was a lot happier, and then commit suicide. It just doesn't make sense that way. Yvonne says he wouldn't abandon his love. Well, I don't know, he could have had feelings. Sometimes you have feelings and you don't act on them. Who knows? Terry Dean says, I wonder about Vincent's goals in regards to his artwork. I think he was getting somewhere. He's definitely, any person who does, produces that kind of focus and output consistently is going to advance up a level. The quality of work, their standards are going to improve. So no matter what you're doing, if you work hard and long and consistently, you're going to improve as a person, your quality of work is going to get better. Stephanie says he hoped to earn an honest living, to have his floral still lives hanging in homes. Well put. Nisi says, strangest place to commit it there. Yeah. Terry says, did he want fame? I wonder what he would think about how famous he became. I don't know if he wanted fame. I just think no one understood his art, and he just wanted people to give him a chance, really. I think he wanted to be just accepted as an artist. And he kind of was by Dr. Gachet. Dr. Gachet saw that this guy is a better artist by far than he was, certainly. Stephanie says he did improve and would have continued. Yvonne says, thanks for opening up the chat tonight, Nick. Pleasure, Yvonne. Okay, so I'm kind of about done. This is going to be a shorter live than usual. I know some of you need to go to bed. But I think you'll agree with me that things are now going up a notch. We're getting to the true crime meat and potatoes. The next chapter kicks off in July, the last month of his life. So we are now kind of in the end game of Van Gogh's story. And there's quite a lot of complicated dynamics to work through. So it's really important that we went through these first 9 chapters of Bailey's book to understand the artist, but also to understand some of the things that he doesn't acknowledge. I'm talking about Bailey, to get to this understanding of what likely really happened. Stephanie says, it's good chatting with subscribers and members tonight. Thank you for all joining the discussion. Lamtoon says, seems like he was happy with his progress in his letters, just frustrated with not getting sales. True. Nisi says, thanks, Nick. Have a great night all. Thanks a lot for that. So this is the last subscribers chat sort of thing. That the next couple of lives will be on the Van Gogh series and also on the Barry Morphy for David. They will be members only. So if you've enjoyed kind of chatting here as a subscriber and you want to continue, then just think about becoming a member. Lamtoon says, thanks for opening it up. Been watching for a while. Thanks a lot for that. Janet Babb, thanks. Loving this series and Morphy and Baldwin coverage. Good night from Ontario, Canada. Ooh, very cold. It's actually pretty warm here. I'm looking at cloudy skies in front of me. That the sun's coming up. It's 6:19 where I am. The sun it will be up in 26 minutes. So, but I can already see it's going to be a cloudy day. Terry Dean says, work kept me largely out of chat. However, I greatly enjoyed listening. Thank you, Nick, Timmy, mods, and chat. Okay, so yeah, just thanks a lot to the mods. Stephanie, Sharon, Jean was here for a while. We've missed you, Bria. Sorry to not see you here. Bria is actually from France. Angela Van Erp says, very nice. Angela, where are you from? You've got a Dutch-sounding name. Lisa Stokes says, thank you. Thanks a lot. Madeline, good to have you here. So we're going to see Stephanie on Sunday. Stephanie, what time is going to suit you? Oh, is Sky here as well? Yeah, it's also late for Sky. Stephanie, what time are we going to be doing our StreamYard on Sunday? Terry says, Timmy has a great set of lungs. Yeah, is lying down here. I don't know if you can see him there. He's just doing that. Yeah. Every time I do this, it's such a mission. Paddy says, great episode as always. Thanks from Paddy. Stephanie says 7 or 8. So is that Eastern Standard Time? Can we not do it a bit earlier, like 2 o'clock your time, something like that? Just trying to see 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Is 3 o'clock in the morning. That's not going to work. Can we do it earlier in the day, like 2 or 3 p.m., something like that? Unbreaded, I'm living in Seattle, but I've been to Cape Town. I will return one day once we are able to teleport in time and space via our memories. See you then in person, mate. Okay. Angela Van Erp, I live in New York, lots of Dutch families and history upstate where I am. Yeah, I mean, New York was once called New Amsterdam. And, you know, the Dutch actually found New York first, and then lots of places the Dutch sort of found first. I think New Zealand was another one. And then the British just moved in and took over. The Dutch did all the work, and then the British just came and said, oh, thanks a lot, snapped it up. Can you imagine if the Dutch held on to some of these colonies? South Africa is another good example. The Dutch came here first, and then the British said, thanks very much, we'll take it from here. So, yeah, so the next Van Gogh episode will be on Sunday. The next Barry Morphew will be on Saturday. Stephanie says, can I check my son's robotics schedule and tell you tomorrow? Just to be clear, that's not that her son's schedule is robotic, but that her son is interested in robotics. Okay. We may be away that day. Okay. Unfortunately, if you are away, I'm going to have to do that chapter, which I'd love to do with you, but I'm going to have to do it on my own because I've got to get through this stuff before I'm leaving. I don't want to sort of get you guys really interested in everything, and then I have to go on a trip later this month, and I wouldn't want to do that. I want to kind of build up the narrative and finish it, right? So I might have to do chapter 11 on my own if you're not around. I also just can't do it at 3 a.m. Yeah, I just don't think that's going to work. Patricia says, haven't the British done that all over the world? They have. Did you know that French was the official language in Britain for 300 years? Did you guys know that? hybrid episode, Vincent Van Morphew. Yeah, not going to happen. Stephanie says, I understand. I'll find out tomorrow where his meet is. Okay. Cowboy Don says, thanks for opening up chat, Nick. It's 10:22 p.m. here in the Ozarks of Missouri. Well, I didn't actually know. I know there's a series called Ozark. Is it Ozark? Ozark on Netflix. So that's actually based on a real place in Missouri. Good old Brits. Okay, guys. Thanks for making it. I'm sure you'll agree this is quite an interesting episode. The next one's definitely going to ratchet up a gear. We're actually dealing with Van Gogh being pretty upset about something. And how does he deal with that? How does his family deal with that? And what does he paint during this period? Did not know that. Okay. Can you squeeze in summer too before your vacation? I don't know if I'll do a live on Summer Wells, but I do want to do a analysis of what Grandma said and whether that is contradicting what Candace said. I do want to do that next. Timmy, do you want to go for a walk? Timmy, do you want to go for a walk? Go for a walk. So I think we are going to go for a walk, as long as he doesn't chew up another pen. Stephanie says, so much going on here. Our thoughts are with the folks in Ukraine. I must say, every time I look at that, it just seems to be getting worse. I do feel like I can't really afford to pay too much attention to that. It's just so, such a nightmare, isn't it? Candace did a live last night, quite interesting. I'll check it out. Patricia says, thank you, Nick. You always make me feel clever and grown up. Love it. Thanks. I appreciate that. Okay, guys, I hope you have a good sleep. Those of you in the Northern Hemisphere, those of you in the UK, our day, and here, our days are just starting. So are the birds singing here? I think they kind of all wet and soggy and shivering, so they're not really singing. I don't hear them. They normally are. Yeah, draining, that's for sure. Okay, so thanks everyone for joining us. Stephanie, Sharon, Jean as well. The mods that were here, thanks a lot for being here. All the members, Madeline, Terry, all the members that have been just sort of actively, on every episode. It's been good to have you here. And then subscribers, it was good to actually speak to you guys again. Hope to see you guys again soon as well. So I hope you guys have a good sleep, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.